Welcome to A Blueprint for Equity, a show about constructing a more inclusive community in the architecture, engineering, and construction industries. I'm your host, Candice Harrison, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at SSOE Group. Each episode will explore the challenges and opportunities facing the AEC industry as we strive to create a more equitable and inclusive environment from job sites to conference rooms. Our guests will share their perspectives on key issues and help us understand how we can advance DEI practices in and around our industry. Welcome to our very first episode of A Blueprint for Equity, where we're constructing a more inclusive community. Today, I have the wonderful opportunity to speak to 3 DEI leaders from 3 different universities, residing in 3 different regions across the U.S. It feels fitting to start our first episode by focusing on education. We know that if we want to build a diverse workforce, we have to start at the collegiate level, sometimes even going back as far as high school and even elementary school. So today, what we're going to discuss is how these leaders are working to increase access and representation in the fields from which we draw our talent. So today, I want to welcome Dr. Lesley Berhan from the University of Toledo College of Engineering, Dr. Erdogmus from Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and Dr. Shaz Vidgley from the University of Portland, Shiley School of Engineering. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
So I'll start by introducing Dr. Lesley Berhan, who I have the honor of working with pretty regularly as we have a strong partnership with the University of Toledo College of Engineering. Dr. Berhan is the Associate Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement at the University of Toledo College of Engineering. Lesley is also an Associate Professor in the Department of Mechanical, Industrial, and Manufacturing Engineering. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad, her Master's of Science in Civil Engineering from MIT, and her PhD in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Michigan. Lesley, please tell me a little bit about what you do at University of Toledo and how you're working to impact the work that we do in our industry.
Thanks, Candice. So at the University of Toledo, in my role as Associate Dean for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, I lead the development and execution of initiatives and programs to facilitate the recruitment, retention, and success of students from underrepresented groups in engineering. So that includes women, students from underrepresented minorities, as well as first generation and low income students. And really, not only that, I'm in charge of initiatives to improve the overall climate and the student experience as well. These duties include not just looking at our current students, but also looking at students at all stages of the pipeline. So, for example, we do initiatives for K through 12. We have an annual Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day. We also have initiatives to really improve access to engineering of all students in the community. We're working really closely with making partnerships with school districts, for example, and building pathways through the College Credit Plus in Ohio, which is the dual enrollment program, for example, as well as so looking at really expanding opportunities for increased access to engineering degrees and, of course, careers. And also we work really closely with industry partners such as SSOE to really help deliver what the talent and the diverse talent that you're looking for. So we are really aligned with yours in that respect.
Next, we will travel from the Midwest to the Southeast to meet Dr. Erdogmus, who is the professor and chair at the School of Building Construction at Georgia Tech's College of Design. A highly respected architectural engineering scholar, Ej holds a Master of Science and PhD in Architectural Engineering from Pennsylvania State University. Her research expertise covers assessment and rehabilitation of historical and existing structures, masonry design and analysis, and STEM education research, assessing the impact of virtual and augmented reality technology on student engagement and diversity awareness. Ej, can you talk to us a little bit about your role at Georgia Tech and a little bit about what you do and some of the things you're working on related to DEI?
Thanks, Candice. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I'm the school chair here at School of Building Construction, and I'm a generalist in terms of the AEC spectrum. I started in architecture, always in love with the built environment, but then I quickly discovered, maybe not so quickly, I did finish that degree, but I'm more on the technical side of things. My brain works a little bit more that way, love of math and understanding how things work. That's why I was drawn to engineering. And at Penn State, under architectural engineering, I got to learn about the breadth, which covers construction management. At Penn State, I did specialize in structural engineering branch, but always looked at the integration of AEC. And many years later, I have the honor of chairing a school that covers construction management, facility management, and related built environment degrees here. So in terms of DEI, my passion has been longstanding, and it's not in my title per se, but in all the things I've done as a faculty member, as a researcher, and as a role model. I've always worked to increase women's involvement in research activities, but I'm recruiting students as well as racial and ethnic diversities. I kind of want to keep in mind that we do get thrown into fields where we don't feel alone. So the see it so you can be it, I think, does apply. I have been in conferences or in environments where I'm the only one, depending on which side of me we're looking at. You know, we all have stories where there are things said or different kind of expressions that made me feel or question of, do I belong here? So as I became a mentor, a professor, later on a leader, I kind of wanted to make sure that us in the leadership, the faculty roles represent the variety of humanity, so everybody feels welcome. As you know, I got tenured and promoted, and I could be a little bit more selective on kind of research I can do. I really started focusing on STEM education research. How do we develop that engineering identity, AEC identity? Why do girls or certain demographics do not choose? Because if we look at statistics, they're pretty grim still in this day and age. And it kind of comes back to, as you said, the education. If we look at professors and there's an image of an engineering professor or a construction management professor, which I certainly didn't fit that image. I got that question. Really? You're an engineering professor? Yes, I am. So I think those kind of things made me question how I project myself, and I can stay true to me, like whether it be wearing my red high heel shoes or big earrings or whatever it is, and still teach very tough engineering concepts or talk about construction, or switch my shoes to boots and go to a construction site and be completely fine with a concrete pour, for example. I think one of the things I'm passionate about showing is you can be both. You don't have to be either or. I love being in the dirty construction site as much as being in a nice office. One of the research I have right now is an NSF-funded research where we use virtual reality, where you can create educational modules that can be more diverse than the environments we actually have. So kind of looking into the future where you can have avatars that are more representative of the humanity than maybe our actual field is. So the students can see, okay, you know, this project manager looks like me and I can be one, and we can give stories to them. We can do different things. Another project I recently got, and that's internally funded by Georgia Tech, is inclusivity in a different way. One time we were telling our freshman students construction site visits are very important. You have to all come, it's mandatory, and so on. And a student in a wheelchair came to me and said, how do you expect me to do this? You're saying it's very important to our field for us to learn, but I can't. So what we did with the technology that we could think quickly is, okay, we'll FaceTime you and we'll walk you through. So what we're right now working on is virtual site visits that we can make interactive, so we can bring that experience to the students, no matter where they are and what their maybe condition is. So there are many ways to think about inclusive and all are welcome. And I think I'm thinking of all of those. It's a big mountain to climb, but I think we're all very passionate about it.
Last but certainly not least, from the West Coast, we have Dr. Shaz Vidgley, who is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Associate Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Portland's Donald P. Shiley School of Engineering, which is where he called home since 2014. He has a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Texas in Austin and received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Washington in Seattle. In addition to lectures and research, Shaz serves to advance curriculum initiatives, global engagement, and engineering education, focusing on the transition from high school to college for students from all backgrounds. Shaz, that's a wonderful, comprehensive scope of work that you do. So I'm really interested to hear more about your role and responsibility and your impact to DEI at the University of Portland.
Thanks for having me for this important conversation. Like I said, I've been at UP since 2014, and I came to academia knowing I wanted to teach, but not 100% sure what way I wanted to teach. And I think that the most interesting thing that I can offer in this conversation right now is a program that I started with my dean in 2015, right after I got here, when I was kind of like, oh, did I make the right choice? Was to work really closely with our local high schools. And I think there's data that suggests that people choose their interests well before college, not their major, not their profession, but their interests well before college. So if we want to increase the pipeline in the professional workforce, we probably need to be starting in the 8th, 9th, 10th grade range. So in 2015, my dean and I started a program with the two high schools that are closest to the University of Portland campus are kind of very diverse populations. Oregon and Portland have a long history of racist policies and racist practices. So it's not necessarily the most diverse part of the country, but just like every other community, there are pockets of lots of minority citizens. So in the region nearest campus, that's where we have a high percentage of Black and Hispanic students or families. So we started a program in which we would, every spring semester, 12 to 15 students from one of those high schools, so 25, 30 total, would come to campus for a whole semester, twice a week, and take a class from me. This class was their intro to engineering class. So if they ended up coming to UP, they would get that class counted for if they wanted. We ended up trying to kind of encourage them to take it again, so they kind of really built their confidence. But the whole thing, and we didn't see this kind of with foresight, we saw this with hindsight. What we did was we immediately got rid of imposter syndrome for these students, right? They were juniors in high school, and they were taking a college class on a college campus. It's not possible to feel like an imposter if you've done what you're supposed to do, right? You know, the class was fun. We goofed around a little bit. We built a little wind turbine. They got to learn about all the disciplines of engineering. And over the course of 6 years, we just ended the program, and I'll explain why in a moment, but we just ended the program last year, and these students build wind turbines, learned about engineering. Many of them chose engineering as a major, but many of them didn't, and that's got to be okay. But what the intangible or the less tangible part of it was, they spent 16 weeks, twice a week, for 2 hours a day on a college campus. They would sit in the study lounge and do their homework after class was over. They would go get coffee and French fries from the Commons. They would act like college students when they were in juniors in high school. And it was just transformative for these kids because they weren't sure. I mean, these high schools that they went to had high rates of college placement, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go there and thrive. And what we were trying to do was give them the opportunity to feel really successful before it mattered, if you will. And the way I'll kind of end this part of the conversation is just, we let that program run for 6 years. And what ended up happening is these were schools that didn't have as many resources, so they couldn't have their own STEM classes at the beginning. But what they saw was an increase in demand for STEM courses and robotics courses and programming courses. So they went to their funders. They found donors to fund STEM teachers. So they didn't need us anymore because they went and hired their own STEM teacher to teach a programming class, to teach a robotics class, so that instead of the 15 that can fit on the bus to come to me, now they can do 30 or 40 in a full day. We ended it because it felt like it did what it was supposed to do. I would say that that's the biggest thing I've done in the DEI space since I've been at the University of Portland.
First of all, that's an awesome program. And I really like that it immediately inspired leadership in them. So it's like you said, it went from being able to serve 15 students to 40 and probably even more since they started with being able to offer STEM in their schools. So with that, I'm going to say, okay, disparity in STEM fields across the country, in our industry overall. What inspired you to want to create change at your school, or, just in life, or however you're approaching DEI or the things that you're doing to try to create change in your organizations? Where did the inspiration come from? And I'll start with Lesley.
I will say that, I started on a regular academic career track. That DEI was not an official part of my title when I started here 19 years ago, which is a long time. I was, regular, started as an assistant professor in mechanical engineering department and moved up the ranks. But when I started out, I was the only woman in my department. I was the only Black faculty member in the College of Engineering for a very long time, for maybe the first, 12 years at least of my career. So I was always very mindful and conscious, as Eja was saying, of who I am and in the spaces I'm in, but also, you're very aware and cognizant of the fact that there are students who are looking to you as a mentor and a role model, and who they see themselves in you, and you're one of the few faces that look like them. Not only students, but people in the community. Like when I was an assistant professor, for example, I had someone from the community reach out to me this was a white mom who homeschooled her kids and was involved in lab robotics, and she was struck by the lack of diversity at the competition. So she wanted to work at a Toledo high school, but she was mindful of the fact that as a white woman, she didn't necessarily think it was her place necessarily to kind of swoop in and decide to be the person to mentor these students. So she approached me, probably because she went on the University of Toledo engineering website and saw me, because there was nobody else. So I got involved that way and, coached the robotics team, and they went to state. So, that was a kind of Cinderella story. So all through my career, even though it wasn't at the time a formal part of either my research or my job description, I've been very involved and passionate in improving access and broadening participation for women, for students from underrepresented groups, et cetera. And I've taken that role very serious, and it's part of what I want to do. Like when you're starting off in academia, they tell you, oh, don't do too much service, but this is the kind of service that you want to do and that you can't help but doing, and then you do it, not because even sometimes if it may not be the best career decision, others from the outside looking in may say that wasn't a smart decision, but and I see my friends nodding, so like we do it because we are passionate about it, and because we know that in the long run, really, to me, that's really what makes a difference and an impact, as much or even more than the technical side. And what's kind of been nice for me is that over the years of my career, I've been able to transition my research away from the technical side. Not that anything's wrong with the technical research, but my research now is in engineering education in areas of access and equity. I actually just got start date is today. I actually just got a grant from NSF in the new racial equity and STEM education program that I'm really excited about. So I think to answer, this is a long-winded way of answering your question. Basically, my motivation was that there's so much work to be done that needs to be done. And regardless of the stage in your career, even if you're just starting out, you say, well, who's going to, this needs to be done, and who's going to do it? And I have ideas. And then that eventually became formalized into a position which is well aligned, fortunately for me, with both my interests and my research now. So it kind of all has come full circle in that my official role, my current research, and my passion that I've had all along are all kind of now living in the same space.
And that's wonderful when everything that you're passionate about in general can all intersect and you get a chance to, fortunately, call that work. That's exciting because it probably doesn't feel like work.
Oh, it does feel like work sometimes, but yes.
I guess at some point work always is going to feel like work.
Yes, but you're right.
So AJ, how about you? What inspired you to want to create change? I know you shared some of that when you talked about some of your experiences, working in the industry where a lot of people don't look like you, but it had to be something, at the core that made you really want to take this on and get out in the forefront of it.
So I think my answer is very similar, and I resonated with Lesley in that it's really a culmination of lots of drops, right? You see something, you hear something over and over, and in the beginning of our career, PhD is tough in engineering, and then being an assistant professor is tough. You're basically in survival mode. But there were a lot of these moments that I'm like, that's interesting. Like the first day I went to teach the 70-person class, a male student walks in, looks me up and down, and literally says, well, that's new. So it's just a culmination of all kinds of things. I'm at a construction site with a male graduate student, the superintendent. It's my project. It's my research project. I'm the PI. The superintendent refuses to talk to me and shake my hand and just talks to the male graduate student. Or I'm trying to make a pitch about how great my research idea is to a senior colleague, and all they have to say is, well, I would wear black if I were you to be taken seriously. That kind of like little drops at a time. And then the students coming and asking for advice. A lot of advice, just like Lesley, I was told many times, like, don't do this much service. I'm like, well, if I'm not advising students or talking to them about their problems, who will? So you kind of start getting into these like speed dial of committees. You're initially the diversity token. You have to show up on the committee, because if you don't, nobody will be in that committee. And initially you're naive and you're honored. I'm like, ooh, I keep getting asked to be on these search committees. This is great. I must be doing a great job. Then you understand you play a specific role in those committees. And even though I'm aware of that, I'm still glad I've done it. Like, yes, maybe I could have done an extra paper here and there, but I represented my community on that committee and maybe helped them make a better choice. So while you start doing this a little unintentionally, eventually you come to a point that you kind of want to direct those. There are many other things. I became a mother, and I realized, the maternity leave for faculty is really not that good, or, you can't find lactation rooms in engineering buildings in academia. Like there are a lot of different things that can be done. And I kind of said, okay, I'm going to be a little more mindful of what committees, what service I'm doing, maybe even guide my research in that direction. So my passion and things I'm already doing are actually helpful. But unfortunately, a lot of those efforts, you don't get credit, right? You don't get a medal. You don't, get promoted because of them, but mainly you do it because you think it's important. That's how I got inspired to do more and more.
And I think a lot of what you and Lesley both shared, while you guys are making impact in the AEC industry, a lot of your experiences cross all industries. It is what it's like often times to be a woman in the workplace. Those microaggressions, like how to dress, how to speak, when to interject and say something or when not to. I think those things kind of are challenges that women face in general, regardless of the industry. So really interesting information. Thank you. Shaz, what about you? What inspired you to create change?
That's a kind of a phenomenally good question. So I appreciate it very much. I think two things came to mind. One was I was born in India, but I only lived there for a few months, and my parents immigrated right after I was born. And we ended up in a small border town in the west of Texas, right on the border of Mexico and New Mexico and Texas. So I looked like everyone else, but I was not like everyone else, right? Like it was a 80, 85, 90% Mexican American community. I didn't speak Spanish. Everybody assumed my mom spoke Spanish at her work. And it was an interesting place. And it was kind of a very blue collar community. We were middle class. It was a great place to grow up, and I learned a lot of great things. And this is all hindsight, of course. I'm not a 15-year-old thinking like this. But what I realized is in academia, we have this kind of unique opportunity and unique positionality to aid in social mobility. And that is where that I would say that was my inspiration, was this community I grew up in, which was largely blue collar. Most of my friends from high school stayed there and worked mediocre jobs for the rest of their career. A lot of people went to college and a lot of people got good jobs, but in a middle class community, it should be larger, in my opinion. It should be more people pursuing careers that provide them financial independence. And I guess that's one of my inspirations, is seeing firsthand the ability of a good, stable education, professional education, which I just happened to choose engineering to be that professional education path, but a stable kind of education that can provide for social mobility in these communities that haven't had that opportunity. That would be one inspiration. The second was when I got to the University of Portland, and we're a small private Catholic school in the West Coast. Portland, like I said, is not an incredibly welcoming place, particularly for Black citizens. We have a large Hispanic population. We have a very large Asian American Pacific Islander population. The University of Portland has been increasing in those kind of demographics, but our Black population hasn't really changed at all. When I got to UP, it was kind of our demographics were abysmal, but the community we were a part of, like the North Portland community, was very diverse. And I just kind of, the disconnect didn't seem right to me. And I said, well, there's high schools right there that have the students that we claim to want to serve. Let's see if we can do something about it. So that inspired that program that I had worked on. And I don't even, by no means do I want to say that this was a one-person effort. Like UP has been making massive strides in the last 10 years on broadening participation at our university. In general, School of Engineering could do more. We're regional, so we tend to pull from Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii, which is kind of interesting. So Washington and Oregon are traditionally states that don't have a very large population of minorities. California obviously has incredibly diverse. And then we get a lot of students from Hawaii, which kind of makes our Asian American Pacific Islander numbers very positive. So I would say that those are my two inspirations for doing the work we do. And I just have to agree with both of my colleagues. Everyone told you not to do this kind of service. And I had proposed this project and they said, oh, this would be a great service project, not a research project. And he kind of emphasized the word service. And I write this in my tenure evaluation or my promotion evaluation. I said, I'm just being efficient. I'm taking a service project and I'm publishing a paper about it and I'm teaching a class on it, right? Like, I call that being efficient. I'm covering all three of my buckets with one project. So you can't knock me for trying to be efficient with my time.
Listening to all three of you, one thing that comes to mind, which is just a pivot from the just education discussion and just to DEI in general, all three of you took a problem that you saw through your own lens, that you created something special to help your institutions be better, which is what I'm striving to do in our company. Looking at where are the disparities, where do we need more employees from different demographics or maybe different age groups, differently abled individuals, from the lens that I see that other people who, may be more of the predominant demographic in our company may not see. So they've been telling you don't do service projects or don't do these things, but you don't see it as service. You see it as this is a priority. This is something we need to prioritize. And I think that's why diversity, equity, and inclusion, staff members, initiatives, departments, what have you, are incredibly critical in education, but in any industry, because you guys have the ability to provide a different perspective that the company just can't get because they don't come to the table with the same experiences. So our company, as we talked about before, SSOE, we're located in Ohio, but we have offices all over the country, which a big part of why we selected people from 3 different regions, because we have offices in each of the cities where you all work, and we have relationships in those cities. And so we want to make sure that we're providing a resource to the universities, as well as asking you to extend yourselves today. How important is it for companies like us to become strategic partners with you? Because I know you said small, private, Catholic college, state institution, income, I'm sure it's probably a big part of it, but also our expertise, I'm sure. So tell me, what kinds of ways or why is it important for strategic partners work together or partner with you to help your programs and our communities be better?
I think, first of all, I love academic industry relationship or collaboration in education. It's often seen as you get one or the other, academics or faculty are seen as like, okay, they haven't really practiced. They don't know like how we're going to actually practice. And we have a very applied field, right? We put the built environment together and it is difficult to do it via lectures. So I love it when we have guest lecturers. We have here at Georgia Tech School of Building Construction a really strong advisory board. I tap on them as often as I can with their permission, because the students need to see a variety of successful individuals from all demographics doing what they're getting trained to do. It's one thing we tell them, this is how you do it. This is, the equations. This is the textbook. This is the software. But they really can only visualize themselves in those roles when they meet the individuals, when they visit the construction sites, the offices, or they come and talk to us. And I am very mindful that we are diverse in those guests, right? So we kind of have a wide variety of representation. So that's definitely one way, and it works really well. We started a mentorship program from the industry for our undergraduate students. We're just kicking that off. Again, you have a certain relationship with faculty. We hope that it'll be a different lifelong relationship with successful individuals from the industry. And also, I'd like to hear what the industry needs from us. Are we teaching the right things? Are our students graduating what they want them to know? And often, partially because I think there's a great trust in Georgia Tech, but also they usually say they know what they need to know, and what they don't know, we can teach them. What we really are looking for are those soft skills. Are they able to come present? Are they able to communicate in difficult situations with different groups of people? And I think that's another place where we can partner, where we have the students present in front of faculty and industry members in a class presentation, for example. So they kind of get to see that interaction. So those are just a few ways, but some of the more powerful ways I think we can partner. One thing I'll conclude with in that question is we have a summer program that's 2 weeks. And we do several industry interactions with the high school students and our advisory board members. And at the end of the 2 weeks, a student who started with, we did also into, just like Shaz, I kind of turned it into a research project. And we did a pre-survey and a post-survey. We did student reflections. And one of the most powerful things one female student said was, at the beginning, she wasn't that interested in construction management, because she didn't perceive it as a very diverse industry, which is very correct. It's not a very diverse industry. But at the end, she saw enough successful faculty and industry members, more important that she saw industry members who were female, that she was way more confident at the end that this would be a career path for her. And I think that made my heart happy. That was a good success and reflection.
I'm going to ask you the same thing, Shan.
Internships will be my answer, because I think what our students do is they come to school. We only get them for this little snapshot, this 4-year snapshot, 5-year snapshot. Many of them pick engineering and they don't really know what that is. And when they say, okay, I'm going to go work for an engineering firm, and I'm in the field of mechanical engineering. So they think about all the companies, they think about Tesla and all of these companies. Like, that's where they want to go work, because that's how their brains have been trained. Is they haven't actually thought about all of the things behind those successful companies. So SSOE is not a widely known company outside the field of AEC, but our students would love to work at a place like that. So finding internship opportunities for them, I think that helps with imposter syndrome too, because, for 3 months you've been an engineer. You can't ever say you don't deserve to be an engineer again, right? No one can ever say you don't deserve to be an engineer because you have been one. So I think that would be my ask of industry. All industry is the pipeline can really help with internships in college, especially at a place like us where we're not an R1. Our students are coming here we're kind of a liberal arts college with professional schools attached. So we get this really well-rounded, general, broad engineering education, and they are perfect for entry-level engineering positions. And I know that SSOE and all the companies like you need that. So internships that maybe would, in an ideal world, turn into full-time employment. It seems like a really good way for industry to partner.
And we want the students. So please tell them to go to ssoe.com and apply, because we definitely need, representation across our company. And that's one of the reasons why we're kind of embarking upon this new way to communicate with the public about what we do, because we certainly don't see ourselves as experts in the DEI space at all, but we do want to facilitate those conversations with people who we think are and are doing great things in the places that they work. Lesley, do you have anything to add about how industry partners help university programs be successful?
Yes, actually. And I'll start off by sort of echoing what both Edgy and Shaz have said. The University of Toledo, our students are required to do 3 semesters of co-op before they graduate. So our students all graduate with a full year of work experience. So it's obvious the role of and the importance of industry partnerships there is pretty clear in that our students co-op with our industry partners, and they co-op all around the country, actually. And of course, SSOE has always been one of the local companies that hires a lot of our students. And also, I think a lot of companies are really committed to having a more diverse workforce, and they come to us at universities looking for diverse talent. But I think what is great about at least our partnership and our relationship with SSOE is that not only does SSOE want diverse talent, but they have really partnered with us in a very tangible, real way in getting behind how do we, and working with us to ensure that we as a university can attract and develop that diverse talent, which in turn, we hope will, some of them at least will go on to work for SSOE. And literally, they work with us, they see the work that we're doing in this area. And your question is, how do we partner with industry? Well, I'm very grateful and happy to say that SSOE, both as a company and also Vince DePaffy as the CEO, has recently, we've gotten a major gift in the College of Engineering specifically for diversity initiatives that is literally helping us to keep doing what we're doing. Because, it's, in higher ed, especially right now, enrollments across the board are lower, budget, everyone's dealing with budget issues. As important as people know that the work we're doing is, sometimes when cuts are being made, that's sometimes among the first things to be cut. And, all the things that we describe, yes, they're born out of our passions, but they do take resources and they do take, work and effort. And so our partnership with SSOE, personally, I can say, is helping us, in a real tangible way to keep doing what we're doing. I'm not an office of one. I have someone who works with me, and that salary is paid for through that gift. So really, literally, in our case, a lot of the initiatives that we're able to continue doing and some of the new initiatives that we have planned are as a direct result of the funding that we're receiving from SSOE, specifically for inclusive excellence and initiatives that really improve the success, recruitment, and retention of all students, but primarily students from underrepresented groups. So I would say the importance of partnership with the industry, both like internships, also if they're able to, the actual financial support that companies can put behind efforts. And also another thing that is important is partnering with industry, and SSOE included, in some of the outreach that we're involved in the community. Like when we have Girl Day, when we have events that involve K through 12 students, they come here and they not only see our students and faculty, but to be able to interact with engineers and people from their community who work at an SSOE or at other companies is also huge for them to, it really takes a village. And having industry partners as part of that village is critical and important.
So thinking about what we currently do, is there anything more that we could be doing, or anything that you need more from industry partners to make your programs more successful, like things that we can do even once we hire? So let's just say, Shaz, you're doing all the work on your side, and then now we've hired them. What do you need from us to ensure that the work you've done on your side carries over into the workplace?
That's a hard question. I'll give you an example. So before I was in academia, I worked for 3 years at a large aircraft manufacturing company in the Northwest. And I was in their R&D branch, which was really kind of a really exciting thing for me as a young engineer. I had a master's degree, and I was working in a field, in an office, and I think there was probably about 60 people on my floor. And I remember 1 or 2 females, and I remember maybe 4 or 5 non-white males. And I remember thinking that and thinking, this doesn't feel like, my school was much more diverse than that. I don't have a real answer for you, because I don't know what it looks like on that side, as well as I do know what it looks like on this side. But there seems to be some disconnect where we lose people. Colleges are working on getting diverse students, but then they don't stay in the profession. And I don't really know why that is. I don't have a hypothesis yet, but it does not appear that they're staying in the profession. I'm sure there's people that are studying that. There's probably some people looking into that, but I don't know the answer.
That is
And
really interesting.
maybe
I
my
didn't
colleagues have
know.
some thoughts on that as well.
I was going to ask, did anyone else seem to see people? And I mean, just my background is in communications, and I see that a lot. People get communications degrees, and you ask them, what are you doing? And it's not that. I mean, right now, even though I spent a long time doing it, that's not what I'm doing now. So that is an interesting perspective. Are you guys seeing people who major and, matriculate all the way through a program and then decide not to remain in the field? Is that something you're seeing in terms of your diverse students?
I think both from observation, talking to alumni, from all of my experience as an academic, and also I read some articles. I don't think I can speak to all demographics, but for women, I think one of the issues is, I want to say, perceived conflict between family and career. And I will admit, even I had that black and white view when I was younger. I can either be a successful career woman or I can be a mother, and this is what I'm going to pick. And what happened is I just decided later in age, like, wait a second, maybe I can do both. Maybe it is possible. So I think the companies can make it crystal clear when a young professional is walking in the door that they will not judge them or use it against them. Maybe be generous with maternity leave and some flexibility. But I think the fear is I have to pick this versus that. I can't do both, which there's some truth to that. I'm not saying it's easy. I don't want to say, okay, you go back to your job, and everybody's choice is personal. And some people choose to, stay at home, and it's completely fine. But if they feel they're forced to do that, or if they don't have an option, or if they lose career advancement because they took a little time or they went to part-time, they will get discouraged, and they will maybe put their efforts into the family because they feel like there is more return on their investment that way. So I think communicating, checking all the initiatives and maybe flexibility, and communicating that to the young professionals in some ways before they ask, because if they already decided they can't do both, it's a little too late. And if the opportunities are not clear, that was kind of my awakening, because I had never looked into it. And I assumed in academia, certainly maternity leave would be a generous, easy thing to do. And I was very shocked how stringent that was, and it was very discouraging, and so on. So, the articles, some of the research I saw usually says, up to that point when they form a family, they're, doing fine, they're advancing, but maybe they refuse to relocate for a project, or they take some time off, or they go to part-time. Can they come back? Can it be possible for them to still progress in their careers if they slow down for a little bit? So I think that is maybe one thing that I know about, but I can't speak to all diversity, all inclusion in that matter.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, and I think these are sort of discussions that we've had, Candice, and that I've certainly had with others at SSOE, is like a lot of the issues around retention in higher ed and at universities, especially when we talk about women and students from underrepresented groups, some of that does translate to industry. There are some lessons, I guess, or some things that could be taken away from and sort of incorporated in industry. And I think that has come up in some of our conversations, at least with SSOE, just as important as we know, we're now coming to a stage where people are appreciating the importance of sense of belonging and all of that in higher ed. But the same is true in industry as well. So, if you're at a company or in a field where you feel isolated, or you feel like, as we were talking about the microaggressions, et cetera, that may not be an environment that's conducive to you staying, not only at the company, but in that field in general. So that's when you see the importance of things like employee resource groups, and making sure that within the organization you cultivate a climate that recognizes and celebrates the diversity of the employees that you've worked so hard to bring in, and that everyone feels that they belong. So that's kind of, the culture is very specific to the organization itself. As far as one thing that we can kind of learn from each other on, and as far as just remaining in engineering, I think engineering as a whole is still a kind of very hierarchical like structure and very male dominated. So we really have to keep, it's something that you have to keep working at, to see where there may be biases within the structure, or where there are things within the corporate culture that may just be perceived as being part of the culture, but when you look a little closer, they are not supportive of someone who's not the majority, and may really kind of make someone feel less than, or not, that they don't belong. So, and I think that's something that we're probably a little more conscious of in higher ed, as far as retention. And so those are things that we can work with industry to sort of help to kind of make sure that support and that sense of belonging carries over into the workplace, and that when students graduate and when we send them to industry, they remain and they thrive and they are able to do the work that they worked 4 years to prepare for.
Candice, I want to follow up. Lesley brought up some really good thoughts. I think the culture and the internal messaging in companies is huge, because sometimes we do the right thing, but then the story told still can be isolating to the individual who feels like the only one. So, yes, we are a bit more open-minded now with promotions, maybe different. We want to make sure when we have a promotion coming, there, diversity is considered. But then the majority groups, the dominant groups, might say insensitive things like, which was told to me, which didn't make sense. Like, oh, of course you got the NSF grant, because, they want to be diverse in their PIs. My name doesn't even reveal my gender. So it was very, very unfair. So never mind the hard work to write the proposal. But I think a company might promote someone, and it might happen to be someone from an underrepresented group. If they're hearing these kind of messages from their peers, whether it be them being upset for not being selected, that needs to be corrected, I think, very gently and consistently. Because even you could do the right thing, but if the messaging is wrong, it still won't sit well and it won't become a part of that culture.
I love that. And I can definitely understand from both perspectives the feeling that you receive something because you are diverse, not because you're qualified, not because you're talented, not because you're educated, and not because you just quite honestly do a great job, but it has to be some other reason that you would be extended an opportunity. So I completely understand that. Is there anything that you'd like to share? And you can feel free to just jump in. Any different decisions that you made to be able to reach different demographics? So was there anything through, observation, through research, through looking at data that you said, okay, we noticed that because our admissions requirements are this way, this prevents students of color or underrepresented students, socioeconomically different students, this prevents them from admissions to our program. And we might be missing out on great students by the requirements that we've set. Have you guys done anything creatively or just things to consider that to remove those barriers?
I'll jump in here. I have an STEM grant through NSF, STEM is a STEM scholarships program. And the whole point of that grant was to do just that. Initially, the grant was designed for students who had applied to the College of Engineering at University of Toledo, but weren't admitted, but were instead admitted to our university college, which is University College, is a different college, and into that they were admitted to exploratory studies. And what we found was that a lot of those students may have just missed the mark, or may have, based on our entrance requirements at the time, may not have had a high school chemistry, or may not have had access to certain courses through no fault of their own. But then when we admitted them to the university, but not to engineering, we admitted them to exploratory studies with the sort of caveat that, okay, well, you're admitted to exploratory studies, and you can once you meet the transfer requirements to engineering, then you can transfer into engineering. But then they were just kind of like just by themselves. It was sort of like, see you in a year or 2 years or however long it takes you. So that these students didn't develop, any sense of engineering identity or really any, again, we talk about sense of belonging. So the goal of that NSF grant was to create just essentially almost like a pre-engineering program for a subset of students within that population who met a certain level of requirements. We won't get into the grant itself, but we basically designed a pre-engineering program that would not only allow these students to complete the transfer requirements, but also would sort of set them up for success by giving them access to an introduction to engineering course. So at least they begin to feel like engineers, because before they had no access to any engineering courses because they weren't in engineering. So we sort of created through that model and through that program, we created a pathway, an alternate pathway to engineering for those students. And that was that NSF grant. But then COVID happened and sort of just blew the model up, because with COVID, and I think one of the good things, if anything good you could say came out of COVID, one of the good things that happened with COVID, not only for us, but for other universities, was that a lot of universities went test optional. And test optional admissions requirements does improve access for a lot of students, where admissions are more holistic as opposed to being based almost entirely on ACT or SAT. Basically, some students only can do that one time, whereas they're competing with students who do the prep and take it several times, et cetera. So there's a lot to be said for test optional requirements, which, like I said, our switch to test optional was sort of born out of the pandemic, just because in the first couple of years, students literally had no access to the exam, so there had to be another way to admit them. But then with that, we did have to change things. We did a little bit as that program, but it still remains. So we still have that pre-engineering program for students who aren't admitted directly to their majors. And I think looking at creative and alternate pathways that are outside of what we traditionally see as the pathway to an engineering career. You go to school, you do these courses in high school, and then you go to engineering. By being mindful that not everyone has access to the same opportunities for that traditional path, and being open to creating alternate pathways to and through engineering are important. And that's what we tried to do just with that example in our NSF grant.
AJ, I saw you shaking your head earlier,
Yes.
hearing, a little bit about what UT has done here in Ohio. You want to share a little bit about what Georgia Tech, or maybe someplace else that you've worked, or just any impact that you've seen on the curriculum
Lesley
side?
and I seem to be on the same wavelength of some initiatives and things, but Georgia Tech is incredibly difficult to get in. So I discovered that pretty quickly, especially because we have a new undergraduate program. So here I am, like, trying to grow our construction science and management program, but Georgia Tech is overwhelmed with 50,000 plus applications. They don't really are thinking recruitment, they're thinking control of enrollment, right? So we have that difficulty. So I have been here only 2 years, well, less than 2 years. It'll be July 1st will be my anniversary. But one of the first initiatives I started was a dual degree agreement with a community college, with Georgia Highlands College, for the exact same reason and the thinking Lesley has talked about, right? So some students won't have access to the classes, the preparation to compete with other applicants of Georgia Tech. So how can we be more inclusive? Georgia Highlands College is an all-access institution. They have a building information modeling management program that's brand new. We saw a lot of complementary skills we can develop. So the program will have the students start there, spend 3 years. If they're successful, they will be automatically accepted to our program, which is huge, that, they don't have to go through generalized freshman first year admissions. But it's not just getting them here. We're also concerned about their retention and success. So they do finish these programs. So we're also designing a summer bridge program where we help them acclimate from Georgia Highlands and Georgia Tech are very different universities, different campuses. So how do we make sure they develop that belonging, that develop that confidence, what classes maybe they can take in that summer to lighten the load, a bit of a bumper on that culture shock, so to speak, summer program. And we really are excited that it got all approved. So hopefully we will be seeing those students in about 3 years at Georgia Tech, starting to recruit to Georgia Highlands this fall. And cross fingers, we did write an STEM grant to support that as well. I don't know yet the results. So hopefully, if it's funded, we would also be able to provide scholarships to those students, which would be huge. So fingers crossed.
I might just say real quickly, University of Portland's kind of struggling from the other end of the spectrum where we're having a hard time meeting our enrollment targets, which means we aren't really turning too many students away. And that challenge with that is students are arriving, entering the School of Engineering underprepared. So we're kind of having to figure it out after the fact. And that we're kind of in the thick of it right now. So we don't really have an answer for it, but that's the other side of the coin, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I just want to say, we have that as well. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I think this year, I don't know, I teach freshmen, and I think this year, as far as the effects of the pandemic, I think have been the worst. We sort of saw it coming, but if you think about it, these year's freshmen, they effectively lost 3 years of high school math, so that's one of the things that we're trying to do is to really help those students who we have admitted. How can we sort of make up for that? How can we address those issues and help them be successful? But it is a challenge. So you're not alone on that.
Before we close out, I just want to kind of talk about a few things that we have here in terms of statistics. And some of these statistics are alarming, but some of them can be viewed a little bit more in a step in the right direction. So 19% of engineers are underrepresented minorities, but only 2% of engineers are women of color. 70% of women engineers leave the field before they have 20 years of professional experience. And we kind of touched on that earlier when we just talked about people not really remaining in the field. Only 13% of engineers are women, and only 20% of those engineers are disabled. So among architects, the ratio of women to men is 1 to 1.71. Women make up 58% of the national labor force, but only 30% of the STEM workforce. So do you guys see any enrollment trends that either mirror these statistics, or would you say in your institution, you're making strides the other way?
I'll jump in with a statistic that I'm really, really proud of. For a construction program, we have unheard statistics for faculty. 71% of my tenure track faculty are women, and we're 50% female. For all faculty, we have about 53% underrepresented minorities among our faculty. So I'm really proud of that. And that's not the student statistics, but I'm hoping that will create the student statistics that mirror these instead of what the industry is looking like today. Another very small population data, which in research we would not really count it, but I'm still proud. So in our new undergraduate program, we just graduated our first class of graduates, and 3 are women, including 1 woman of color. So I think it's possible to change push the needle in the other direction, but I think there's still a lot of work to do. So if we look at a typical class that we teach, it's still majority white and majority male.
I think what I see here is more or less reflected in the statistics that you just gave. Although we do see we definitely see how programs like the one I described do help to increase the diversity of the undergraduate population. Like if I look at the population of the students within GERSET, which is the program, the Greater Equity and Access for Readiness for and Success in Engineering and Technology. So the GERSET students are more diverse than the general engineering population, and that wasn't deliberate, but it's just that when you improve access, that happens kind of naturally. But I will say that there are other issues. I think that one of the things that, just briefly, like my brand new NSF grant in the Racial Equity in STEM Education program, is looking at one of the issues that I've been passionate about, and is within here at the University of Toledo, we have both engineering and engineering technology. And most of our diversity in the college is in engineering technology. And there are many reasons for that, which we can't get into here. But the whole NSF grant is going to look at that, because there are many issues, just systemic issues within K through 12 that contribute to why students from some underrepresented groups in general, and Black students in particular, may not have as much access to engineering programs than they do to, say, engineering technology. And when we see statistics like the ones you gave, like the technology students, which are a 4-year degree, are sort of not included. So they're like the hidden numbers within engineering. And that is something that I think is underexplored. This new grant is going to look at. I think there's only so much we can do here at this level, but really, I think there's a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed in K through 12 and in industry. The issue is a lot bigger than just within higher ed. And we can't, in order to really effectively see a change, I think there's many different things that we have to kind of as a collective, as a community, look at. Industry and academia as well.
Just to wrap up, there's no cookie cutter way to impact diversity in higher education, in the AEC industry, or otherwise. But what we have learned here today is just by using our diverse lenses, using creativity and thought leadership, and also understanding that the partnership in industry and universities or education is critical, is one way that we can impact diversity in our industry. It takes a village to construct an inclusive community, and part of our village is our higher ed counterpart. So I want to thank Ejay, Lesley, and Shaz for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy time for you, or maybe not, maybe it's your free time, but whatever the case, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, to help us set the bar really, really high for our very first podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We hope that people will enjoy what they've learned from you and be able to take something back into their workplace and just do better to create more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the AEC industry. So thank you again for joining me. Thank you again for taking the time, and thanks for sharing your expertise. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Blueprint for Equity. I hope you gained some insights to inspire you wherever you're at in your own DEI journey. To see today's show notes, visit our podcast page at ssoe.com/podcast. While you're there, you can leave a review, subscribe to the show, and suggest future topics and guests. Until next time, remember that constructing a more inclusive AEC community is a journey that we're all on together. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, and you can learn more about careers at SSOE by visiting ssoe.com/careers.